Good afternoon. My name is Jim Townsend, and I am the director of the Levin Center at Wayne State University Law School. Welcome to today's post-election analysis panel discussion. Thank you for joining us, and I hope everyone in attendance today is staying healthy and safe in these extremely challenging times. But one of the challenges of 2020 that we can now check off the list is whether the United States can hold a successful election in the midst of a massive once-in-a-century pandemic and economic crisis. The evidence suggests strongly that the answer is yes. And while President Trump and many of his supporters continue to raise objections to the election's outcome, it appears very likely that Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States. It is time then to turn our attention to reviewing the results of the election, the factors that delivered these results across the country and here in Michigan, and what they mean for politics and governance in the coming months and years. We at the Levin Center are so pleased to have two distinguished guests who will give us their analyses of what happened in this remarkable election and a sense of what to expect from Washington in 2021. But before we get underway, I want to say a few words about the Levin Center. Former US Senator Carl Levin founded the Levin Center in 2015 with the mission to advance bipartisan fact-based oversight and civil discourse as instruments of change. In the past few years, the Levin Center has trained hundreds of congressional staff in the techniques of bipartisan fact-based oversight. And we have begun to bring that training to state lawmakers as well. We support and conduct research on the important oversight topics and advocate for the right of the legislative branch to conduct oversight to ensure transparency and accountability in government. We also bring experts and leaders from around the country to engage in civil discourse about issues of public concern. So today we will hear from US Representative Debbie Dingle, a Democrat representing Michigan's 12th congressional district, and former US Representative Dave Trott, a Republican who represented Michigan's 11th congressional district until 2018. After their remarks, we will have an open discussion and question and answer period, and I will moderate along with my colleague Ben Ike, who is the State Training and Communications Manager at the Levin Center. Ben will then close things out with some brief concluding remarks. Now, we encourage everyone in attendance, in the audience today, to submit questions via the Zoom Q&A function, and Ben and I will do our best to get to as many of your questions as we can. Now to our panelists. First, we will hear from Congresswoman Debbie Dingle, who has represented the 12th district here in Michigan since 2015. Before being elected to Congress, Representative Dingle served as the chair of the Wayne State University Board of Governors. Debbie also had an extensive private sector career with General Motors, where she was president of the GM Foundation and a senior executive responsible for public affairs. So it now gives me great pleasure to welcome Congresswoman Debbie Dingle. Take it away, Debbie.
Thanks, Jim, for that kind introduction. And hello to everybody that's participating in this. And I can't tell you what an honor it is to be here with my friend, David Trott, and you, Jim, and at a center named after Carl Levin, who is one of the most decent men that's walked the face of the earth and was we've had great senators from Michigan, Phil Hart, and Carl took his seat and really was one of the consciences of the Senate. But I've not forgiven Dave for leaving the Congress yet. I think you'll find we have far more in common than we disagree on as we talk today. So, and just for the record, Wayne State does hold a special place in my heart. I was chair of the board at Wayne State as I left to go into the Congress. So I feel a total affiliation with Wayne State and always will. So, here we are. It's 1 week since the election day. It's hard to believe that it's been almost a week. It's Monday. Tomorrow will be the official 7th. Tomorrow will be 8 days. We have a president-elect. It took several days to count the votes. The country was very much on edge as those votes were being counted. It's a very bizarre time. We have seen the president of the United States has not conceded that the election is over. There are lawsuits being filed in a number of states, and it's a really challenging time for all of us as we watch what's happening. I know both Joe Biden and Kamala. They've been good friends. Joe Biden's been a friend for 40 years. I think it's going to be a very long 2 months between now and January 20th. We are going to return to Washington. I'm going back tomorrow after Veterans Day events, and we will begin a lame duck session, which quite frankly, none of us really knows what's going to happen at. We still desperately need a stimulus package in this country. People are really hurting. As I'm out and about, I'm out very carefully. And maybe that's one of the points I'll make at the beginning. The very first thing Joe Biden did yesterday as the president-elect was not to name his senior staff, not to name a transition team, has not even started floating names for the cabinet, but was to appoint a COVID-19 task force and to say to the American people, we could save tens of thousands of lives if you just wear your masks. Please wear your masks for these next few months. And that's the biggest issue we've got to deal with in the Congress. When we go back, I don't know if we're going to get a CARES bill, a stimulus bill, a HEROES bill, whatever you call it. There are a lot of people hurting. There are people that are worried about their jobs. There are people that are worried about their rent and their mortgage payments. We have a food insecurity issue right now. As we're seeing surging numbers, every state in the country's numbers are going in the wrong direction. They're surging. We don't have enough testing capability. We don't have a tracing capability. So it's something we've got to come to grips with. Whether we will or not, I don't know. Mitch McConnell has allegedly indicated that he would like to maybe try to get something done in the lame duck, but it's not clear to me that that's real or serious. And what's even less clear to me is what the president is going to be willing to do or not do. What concerns me as much as, and there are a lot of state and local governments that need help. I could go through the list. The restaurants need help. Small businesses need help. You know, and the head of the Fed, who's a Republican, appointed under a Republican, said, we need to invest in our economy right now. We need to do that investment or we are going to be in serious trouble. So I am someone that thinks we need that. We did get good news yesterday, which was good news for the country and the world and for Michigan. Pfizer has a vaccine that appears to be 90% effective. And Tony Fauci yesterday said we could be around the corner on finding something that's going to deal with the COVID. But what I'm really worried about is December 11th, which is when the budget expires. And I am clueless. I don't know if David's got any insight that I don't, if what President Trump will do. For us to shut down the government right now in the midst of a pandemic whose numbers are going in the wrong direction, when we're in a transition with so much uncertainty in the world, it would be a travesty. But I honestly do not know what this president will do or not do. And for me, the lame duck, I'm going to be very blunt, probably get in trouble. But our job in the Congress is going to try to minimize damage that the president can do between now and when he gets sworn in on January 20th. So that's like the short term. You're going to start to see, I don't know when the president's going to allow GSA to start to fund the official transition of the Biden team, but the Biden team is going to start working now to start to try to do some of the things that they've got to do. And we know what some of the early things he's going to do are going to be. He's going to rejoin the Paris Accord. Global climate is real. He's got to rejoin the World Health Organization so we can as a world be dealing with these kinds of pandemics. For those of us in Michigan, and there's a significant number of Arab American students at Wayne State, I believe he will very quickly repeal the Muslim ban. And then we'll have to look at what our legislative agenda is with a split Congress, which we can talk about more in the Q&A. But we got to get some things done. I do believe that the American people are tired of the partisan bickering, that they want to see us start to get some things done that we need for this country. I am somebody who says we got to come together, we got to figure it out. We got divisions in each party. And I also think we need to not point fingers. Everybody said, I was not surprised at the numbers that Biden won Michigan, or even what happened in the country. A week before the election, I told people that the numbers were tightening, and I got killed by a few people, but I could tell that those numbers were tightening. And we need to not be judgmental of each other. We need to ask each other, why is there this divide? Why did so many people I heard people that don't like President Trump's, the way he is, the bullying, the vitriolicness, the things that they've watched, but they still voted for him because they believed he cared about trade and they'd seen their jobs shipped overseas. Or we got to really talk to each other. And the Republican Party's got to do that kind of soul searching too. They've got issues with women, etc. So I think, we could go through in the Q&A all the issues that we care about. They're going to be major next year. We're going to have to get an infrastructure bill, which I think may be one of the first bills out of the House tomorrow, the 10th. Not the Supreme Court is going to be considering the Affordable Care Act. Are we really going to rip protection away from people with pre-existing conditions? We got to do something about lowering the cost of prescription drugs. I could go through global climate's real. We're going to have to do some things on the environment. I'm somebody who thinks clean water is a human right. So I think we got a lot of tough issues ahead of us. That's how I guess I'll open it up and turn it over to my friend David Trott for his initial observations. I just did that from my heart, guys, and head. So I was unscripted.
We appreciate that. Before Dave starts, let me introduce him just for a moment. Congresswoman Dingle, thank you so much for those words, and we'll come back to you obviously in the Q&A. But we first want to hear from former Congressman Dave Trott. Prior to his career in Congress, Representative Trott was chairman and CEO of Trott & Trott, a real estate finance law firm based in Farmington Hills. Representative Trott has served on numerous boards of organizations such as On My Own, the Detroit Country Day School, the Community House, and the Karmanos Cancer Institute. Please welcome former Congressman Dave Trott. Dave, take it away.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for the introduction and the opportunity to be part of this program. And Debbie, always great to see you. We worked together well in the House, and we went into the Problem Solvers Caucus together, which I think was important to do, and we can talk later about that. And your party should listen to you because you predicted Michigan for Trump in 2016 or thought he could win, and then you made some similar predictions about how it might go this year. And your party should listen more closely to you. Like Debbie, Wayne State is a special place for our family. My wife graduated from Wayne State Law School, had a great experience there. And our daughter works at Wayne State and loves the university. So I appreciate the opportunity. It's been an interesting election week. And, the election, I think President-elect Biden will end up with over 300 votes in the Electoral College. So to that end, it's not that close of an election, but it really is. I think his support is broad but thin. And for example, if you change less than 0.1% of the vote in a half a dozen states, you get a much different result in the Electoral College. So it's a very close election. It was interesting to me to see how well the Republicans did. They were predicted to lose seats in the House, perhaps lose the Senate, lose some state legislatures, and that didn't happen. And I think that's indicative of the voters being unhappy and voting against Trump and not so much for Biden, but against Trump, and then maybe hedging their bets and voting for some Republicans along the way. Kevin McCarthy had a very good night. He, I think, won 28 out of 29 competitive races. I don't know how Speaker Pelosi is going to weather her conference and some of the issues and internal issues there, but I think the Republicans generally did very well. I think Biden won. If you look at the numbers, Trump didn't do as well with women, didn't do quite as well with men, did better with Latinos. But I think the independents really were the reason why Biden won, and those folks were voting against Trump, in my opinion. Where we are right now, it's a complete mess. Trump is acting like a spoiled baby. He's AWOL, hasn't been heard from in 5 days. He's playing golf. He says there's voter fraud and he's contesting the election, but the vice president's going on vacation, so it must not be that tough of a situation. He is using the Department of Justice as a political tool to try and pressure people to investigate voter fraud. He fired our Secretary of Defense, and hope we don't have any problems with North Korea or China in the next 2 months. And then he won't let the GSA fund the Biden transition team, which, the whole world is watching, and we look like a banana republic. And so I hope someone gets to him and explains to him that this is not how you behave. Maybe they could give him a copy of Bush 41's letter to Clinton when he came in '93. That's how you handle a transition. That's how you handle losing. I think Debbie's right. The next 2 months is going to be a damage control, which it kind of reminds me when we used to have sitters come in, and my wife and I would go out for the evening. The goal was just to make sure that the kids didn't hurt themselves. And we'd tell the sitter, just make sure no one gets hurt. And that's basically what the lame duck Congress is going to be trying to do for the next 2 months. That's kind of a sad commentary, wouldn't you say? Who knows how many pardons Trump's going to dish out in the next 2 months. He's going to probably pardon his entire family and himself. And I have great concerns about what he's going to do with respect to keeping the government open on December 11th. I was always a Republican that thought the government should stay open. I wasn't a Tea Party guy that thought that I could make a statement by closing down the government. That's a ridiculous position to take. So I think there's a very strong likelihood, unless Ivanka convinces the president to act reasonably, that the government will shut down on December 11th. And by then we'll probably have 300,000 cases of COVID a day. The economy will be even in worse shape with over 10 million people unemployed or added to the unemployment rolls. And so I think the goal is just to muddle through till January 20th and then start anew. And we can talk about what that'll look like. But the election was very close. The country is very divided. And I think the next 2 months are going to be very challenging for our country because it certainly doesn't feel like we're on strong footing, both with respect to the transition and with respect to Congress's ability to control the president.
Well, Dave, thank you very much for those words, and to both of you. This is just a wonderful opportunity, I think, to talk about the future and unpack a little bit what happened in this election. So I'm going to kick off this open discussion and Q&A just with a little bit of a prompt, just to probe a little further. Dave, you mentioned that we have sort of a mixed message from this election, right? The Biden-Harris ticket won. Certainly, it was a close election in the Electoral College. Not as close in the popular vote, but a close election, fairly close election in the Electoral College. And yet down the ticket, we see the U.S. Senate remaining in the hands, in the majority, in the hands of the Republicans, at least for now. We'll see what happens in Georgia, in the coming few weeks or months. But and then we see that the House was retained by the Democrats, but the Democrats lost seats. So what do you think accounts for this mixed result? What is the message the American people are sending us? And I want both of you to take this on, but Debbie, maybe we'll start with you, and then Dave will come to you.
Well, we're a really deeply divided country, and that's part of what you saw reflected on Election Day. It really worries me because, I remember September 11th, and it was probably one of the scariest days in this country's history. People were worried, but we pulled together as a country. And people actually see themselves as red or blue, and we forget that we're Americans. And that is one of the things that I'm very concerned about in America today. But so if you go to the Midwest or you look at states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, One of the reasons I keep telling people is don't be judgmental, but ask why they did vote the way that they did. It's very complicated. That, you know, Black women came out and really engaged and supported Joe Biden. Women, we're all waiting for the numbers. We do not have numbers. We do not have accurate data. And that is one of we're all data kids, and we need to look at that data. So we don't have it. Women did vote for Joe Biden that did not vote for Joe Biden in 2016. We're hearing different, what the demographics of those women are. But I would guess that more union workers voted for Joe Biden than did for Hillary in 2016. But there are a lot of union workers who, quite frankly, think Democrats look down their nose at them. They've not forgotten the word deplorable, and they think that a lot of Democrats think of them as deplorable. So while there, as I said before, there were people that just categorically don't like the style of Donald Trump, they feel like people care about their job more. So I think the electorate is very complicated right now. And we're going to have to look at this coalition that put Joe Biden in office, understand it. But there are a lot of very complicated feelings. And quite frankly, we are really being pitted against each other. We are being divided with fear and hatred, with false pitting against each other on issues that aren't real. And if we don't come to grips with those, our democracy is more challenged than people think.
Dave, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think there's a few messages and takeaways from the election. I think generally pre-COVID, people were better off and happier today than they were 4 years ago. And so they were inclined to vote Trump back in for another 4 years. Now, that certainly doesn't hold true for everyone. You can pick out all kinds of groups of people that's not true for, but unemployment was down, the economy was doing well. But I think people voted against Trump because they couldn't tolerate his behavior for 4 more years. And I think they also voted against him because of his terrible mishandling of the COVID crisis. And you can point to so many things that the administration did wrong. And at the heart of it, for me, it's so troubling because everything that Trump did and said in response to COVID and the pandemic was motivated singularly by his desire to get reelected. And that's not what a president should be doing, right? But we needed a national mandate for masks. We needed to support the scientific community. We needed to use the Defense Production Act to better protect ourselves. And he failed on all of those fronts, in my opinion. So I think people were voting against the president on COVID. As an aside, I'm not sure that any president could handle COVID in a way where it would be considered a win. I think it's really a tough situation that it's really no positive outcome for an incumbent to handle it. But the president did a horrible job, and I think that's one of the reasons why people voted against him. But I think it's also an example of when I first ran the first time, and Debbie, you'll get a kick out of the story. We did a focus group. And so my campaign team and my wife joined me, and I had never run for political office before. So we're trying to figure, you had been through a few campaigns when you first ran, Debbie, I hadn't. So, and so we're in this focus group, and we walk in the room, and our pollster is a guy named Adam Geller from New Jersey, real good pollster. And we sit down, the first thing my wife announces, and she's not political, she goes, "Now, I don't want Dave doing any of those negative ads." And he said, "We'll talk after the focus group." So 3 hours later, we reconvene, and Cappy's been watching my wife, and she goes, "Well, I guess we're going to do negative ads," because they work. And the negative ads the Republicans ran against members of Congress and senators worked. And the ads were that the Democrats are socialists, that the Green New Deal is an attempt to destroy our economy, and so on and so forth. Whether that's accurate or not, I don't know. But the Democrats gave the Republicans some great messaging opportunities in terms of the 30-second sound bites that I think were persuasive. And so people split their ticket. And I also don't think, certainly Joe Biden is a very experienced and I think a person of great integrity. But again, I don't think, just like in 2016, the Democrats came up with the best candidate they could have against Trump. And I think we've had a few elections now where we really, if you look at the 2016, 2020 election, there's got to be some better people to lead our country.
Well, thank you for that. I want to broaden the conversation a little bit, or shift the focus, I should say, really to the future of our political system and the political parties um, coming out of this election. So I'll start, Dave. I'd like to start with you, and then Debbie, I want to hear your thoughts about both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and vice versa. But I'm going to ask the question first about the Republican Party. What kind of Republican Party will emerge in 2021? Will it be more populist, less populist? Back in 2012, I'm sure both of you remember that the Republicans produced what was called an autopsy report, right? They called on the GOP to become more inclusive in the wake of the presidential defeat of 2012. So, broad strokes, what kind of headline would you give an autopsy of this year's election for the Republican Party?
Well, I think the title would be "The Crazy Guy Is Gone," right? I mean, I think we're moving on from Trump, at least in terms of him not getting reelected. The future of the GOP looks a bit problematic, right? We got Donald Jr. and Ivanka. We've got the president has now created a leadership pack, I guess, in the last couple of days. So he either intends to be relevant using money to influence GOP primaries, or he plans to run again in 2024. And the concern I have is that the 30% or 35% of the base in the party, they're never going to leave Trump. They believe the election was stolen from him. They believe he's the greatest president in their lifetime. And there's no Republican who's going to be able to disparage Trump on any level and get anywhere in a primary in the GOP. So I think we're going to be held hostage, and the half-life of the Trump era is going to be long. And I asked Debbie, let's say I were to run again in 2022. Do you think I could win a primary by criticizing former President Trump?
I don't know. It depends what your district looks like. We're looking at redistricting, but there is a base. David's totally right that there is a base out there that's going to stay loyal to Trump, and that's going to keep the Democratic or the Republican Party off key at a time that they need to find an alternative to Donald Trump that people can coalesce around. But I think both parties have to do real soul searching, by the way. I mean, what's going to happen? I mean, the Republican Party's got a very serious woman issue as well, though there were some women, more women. You lost women in the Congress this time. Some women were elected back. But we've got to look at who we are in the Democratic Party, too. I mean, you've seen the schisms in the last week. Now, I think the Democrats have made a mistake in letting Republicans define who we are. I will say to you that my father-in-law was one of the authors of Social Security. And he was called a socialist. He was called a communist. The Levin brothers and John would sit and tell me stories of crosses being burnt on their lawns. Now, nobody would call Social Security socialism in this day and age. And it's really the only sturdy part of the three-legged stool for safe and secure retirements. We can't let things that have to be spoken about, like in the midst of a pandemic on healthcare, we have seen the fractures in our healthcare system. It is broken. We got to do something to fix it. So that, I mean, I do believe we are the only industrialized nation in the world that does not guarantee its citizens healthcare. That's not socialism. That we're competing in a global marketplace. That's actually an economic factor. But I think we've got to come, both parties have people different. I mean, that's what a healthy democracy is. People with different ideas, but we've got to find a way not to destroy each other in the process of listening to each other and finding that common ground.
Jim, Churchill said, America always gets it right after they've tried everything else. And I think we're in a period where we're trying everything else. And my concern, and I don't want to come across overly pessimistic, but my concern is over the next several years, the country will continue to remain divided. I hope that Joe Biden can be someone that can bring us together and I thought the most profound thing he said the other night was we got a mandate. And when I heard that, I thought, boy, I hope he's not misreading this election, because I don't see it as a mandate. We got a mandate to cooperate. And if he follows that, and Debbie, if the Democrats and the AOCs of the world allow him to, then we could have a very productive one-term president. But what I worry about in 2024 is we go back to the extremes, and the progressive part of the Democratic Party will find a nominee if in fact President Biden only serves one term. And then you could easily see the conservative base and some of the Tea Party folks finding their candidate and convincing the Trump base that that's the right person to carry the mantle going forward. And so you could have two very extreme candidates that would, again, not bring our country together. You know, when Debbie and I went into the Problem Solvers Caucus together, the goal of that group is to come up with bipartisan solutions that can stand the test of time. Because what we're going to see in a month or two is a lot of the stuff Trump immediately came into office and undid that Obama did, and now Biden's going to come in and undo what Trump does. The business community, much less the rest of society, hates that kind of uncertainty and that kind of volatility. We can't have it. It's not good problem solving. And so I hope that over the next 4 years, we find someone, Democrat or Republican, who can be more of a moderate force and come up with bipartisan solutions, because that's really what our founders had in mind.
I want to ask you, though, I want to probe both, that you're getting into some very interesting territory here, I think, from both of your comments. I want to ask this about the Republicans and the Democrats. Starting, say, with the Democrats, though, can a Biden-Harris administration seek compromise and cooperation with Republicans and still retain the support of the Democratic base?
Yes. I mean, Joe Biden's whole being has been to work across the aisle and to find that common ground. I mean, we actually need to get some things done. We have people that need help right now. COVID has turned our worlds upside down. And I think Joe Biden needs how to get some of that done. I think, you know, first thing we need to do is get a COVID package. We need a infrastructure package that isn't not only going to fix our damn roads and bridges, to quote our governor, but broadband. We need broadband is a very serious issue, which COVID has shined a light on as well. And we need it in urban and rural areas. I think there's bipartisan agreement on that. Environmental issues. The Green New Deal's got important goals. I mean, I'm working with autos and the environmentalists now on some critical things. I think there is no person better than to be president of the United States right now than someone like Joe Biden, who is not afraid to work across the aisle, knows how to do it, and is going to include and be inclusive in trying to heal this country and come up and solve problems.
Dave, what would you advise President-elect Biden in terms of trying to find middle ground and bring both his base, you know, the base of the Democratic Party along, but also find a way to make it possible for Republicans to cross over when they've got Donald Trump still on the stage?
Right. So if I was advising President-elect Biden, I would tell him that he should have his party stand down in the runoff elections in Georgia and let the Republicans keep control of the Senate. And then he'd probably throw me out of his office. But and here's why. If the Democrats don't have control of the Senate, then on some level, McConnell and Biden are going to have to sit down and work on things together. And I do agree 100% with what Debbie said. I have a great Joe Biden story. Debbie probably has 20 of them, but I've got a great Joe Biden story. But he is the man he appears to be. He's someone that can work across the aisle, that has good intentions, and that wants to solve problems. And the question is whether his vice president candidate is going to let him do it, right? Whether she's going to cooperate in that regard. If the Senate remains with the Republicans, then on some level, they're going to have to cut deals. And, you know, I had a great line from a buddy of mine that served with Debbie and I, John Delaney from Maryland. And Delaney ran for president in this cycle, and he never made it to the final stage. He was kind of never really thought he was going to get the nomination, but he's a very, very bright guy. He wrote a great book called The Right Answer. I recommend it to your students. And in that book, he said, the cost of doing nothing is not nothing. The cost of not addressing immigration, not addressing healthcare, not addressing infrastructure. These are problems that need our attention. Whether you agree with the solution or not, we need to do something on these problems. And I told Mark Short, who's now the vice president and chief of staff, but back when Trump took office in 2016, I pulled him aside at one of the Republican meetings. He was then the, I think, legislative director for the White House. I said, Mark, I know the president-elect is going to take on healthcare and repealing Obamacare as his first effort when he takes office. As an aside, I still don't know what we're going to replace it with, but let me know when you come up with that plan. But I know that's going to be his first initiative. What I think he should do is call up Speaker Pelosi and Minority Leader Schumer and have them come up to the White House and cut $1 trillion infrastructure deal. And I said, and that's going to upset Paul Ryan and McConnell. They'll get over it. And Pelosi and Schumer will go back to the Hill and scratch their heads saying, maybe this guy does want to work on a bipartisan basis and work with us. Now, of course, he did healthcare, and the rest is history, right? But I think, to answer your question, Jim, I think that President Biden can, in fact, reach across the aisle and get some things done. And I think, you got to take a page out of Reagan's book. The only reason why Tip O'Neill worked with Reagan is because he was worried that Reagan would go around Congress and go directly to the American people and make his case as to why the Democratic Congress is standing in his way. And if Biden can get to the American people and say, these are good solutions we're putting forward, they're not extreme, they're good solutions for our country, then there'll be a lot of pressure even on the Trump Republicans to play ball.
I want to ask, I'm going to turn things over to Ben, and he's going to moderate for a while and ask some different questions. But I want to follow up a little bit with both of you because you've both been on the Hill, being in the caucus rooms in your in the Republican conference, the Democratic caucus. I can remember being in the Michigan House in the Democratic caucus and what it's like when you see the possibility of flipping the majority. And I want to ask you about how do you overcome that if you're President Biden and you're dealing with members of Congress who think that the next election could flip the majority back their way. And when that's the case, they don't have the strongest incentive in front of them is to block the other party and not cooperate. How can you overcome that when you're in that situation?
See, I would actually argue that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And that we have in the first election after a new president is elected, the party in power loses seats and loses control of the House. So I would actually say that if we want to keep the House, we got to get some stuff done. And in order to get some things done, we're going to have to work together.
Dave?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and that may be the single reason why the next 2 years aren't that productive. Because if I'm Kevin McCarthy and I'm looking at the results from last week, I'm thinking, boy, we gained seats. The mid-year election for the party not in power is a good time to pick up more seats. And Kevin McCarthy's thinking he could be the Speaker of the House. And maybe Liz Cheney's thinking that too, but we'll see who gets to win that race down the road. And so why would Kevin cooperate? Because he just wants messaging themes to whether it's on the Paris Accords or all the regulations that are coming or all the illegal immigrants that are coming in now because of President Biden who are going to destroy our economy. That's going to be the theme for the Republicans. And I think the only way that we can get things done and they can overcome that, which is exactly what you described is going to happen, in my opinion, is for President Biden to be so effective at reaching out to the American people that they put pressure on the Republicans, like I said, to cooperate. And I frankly wonder whether he, as experienced as he is that charismatic leader who can rally the American people to the point where the Republicans have to fold. I don't know that he is. I hope he is, because again, these problems need attention.
Ben, I want to turn it over to you for some additional questions.
All right. Well, good afternoon, and thank you both for being part of our panel here at the Levin Center, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Looking at some of the Q&As in here, and I think there's some that are certainly worth taking a quick look here. We've got a first one here for the lame duck session, as well as the period between swearing in the new Congress and Inauguration Day. How much oversight is particularly the House able to demand? Isn't the most likely outcome that the administration will refuse to comply with requests and subpoenas? Whoever would wish to take that one first, go right ahead.
Well, the White House has refused to comply on a lot of stuff since they've been in office, but you saw they've been instructed to save records, to not destroy records, and that becomes prosecutable. Under those, there's going to be a lot of inquiries. And by the way, when you leave the White House, and if there are incidences of illegalities, et cetera, you're no longer protected by the title of your job. So I think you're going to see oversight. I think you'll see investigations after on how money was spent on some of these big projects. And what everybody is going to try to do is to minimize damage. It will be very hard. David talked about the pardons, and that's something that everybody's worried about. You can't reverse those, but executive actions that are taken right now, there are tools to reverse those executive actions.
Yeah, so there'll be, we all know that the Article 1 powers of Congress have been so trampled by the executive branch in recent history. So there's no reason to think in the next 2 months, all of a sudden, Congress is going to be able to assert itself and do any kind of meaningful oversight. There are two problems with oversight today. First, most of the oversight is of a political nature. And when I say that, I mean, and I was never on the oversight committee, but I was, for example, I was on the Judiciary Committee, and we had oversight on justice, and so we had Attorney General Loretta Lynch in front of us, and I'm this is a story that's not that not a good story about my time in Congress, but I'll tell you because it illustrates a point. And I had been told before by the Republican committee staff that General Lynch was a lousy witness. Really would just refuse to answer any and all questions from the Republicans. One person said to me, Eric Holder, when he was Attorney General, he'd at least like to get an argument with us and try and answer our questions and we'd argue. But Loretta Lynch will not answer any of our questions. So I had a staffer, and I was a junior member, so I got to ask my questions in hour 5. Remember those days, Debbie? And so I had a staffer in the room, and I said, keep track of how many times Loretta Lynch says, I don't know, I'm not sure. And when it got to my turn, I asked my first question, said, I'm not sure, Congressman. And I'd gotten a text, and she had said 74 times, I'm not sure, I really don't know. And so I told her that. And then I got a text from my young daughter out in California saying, college daughter, Dad, you're trending on Facebook. And I said, I don't know, is that good, Courtney? And she said, yeah, your questioning of General Lynch is trending on Facebook. The point of the story is, it's just an opportunity, most oversight these days, to get a 20-second soundbite, blast it off back home and tell all your supporters how tough you're being on the administration's witness. So there'll be no oversight. What we need for oversight is we need a court where the lawyers for the people issuing the subpoenas in Congress can go into immediately and have resolution. Right now, if anything happens in the next 2 months on oversight, the Trump folks are just going to go to court, appeal, delay. There may be repercussions after they leave office, but there'll be no ability for Congress to oversee anything in the next 2 months because, frankly, the administration won't cooperate at all, just like they've done for the past 4 years.
Dave, I'm glad you brought up that you served on the Judiciary Committee. Somewhat recently here at the Levin Center, we had a panel about antitrust and looking at the digital marketplace. So some of the recent hearings that we've had with Facebook, discussions around Amazon, in addition to kind of the marketplace concepts, but also the national security discussions. Would either of you care to kind of talk about that area in a little more detail?
Debbie, you want to?
Well, I'm someone that thinks that we need to have more regulation of all of Google, Facebook, other social media. I think, well, we've got to protect freedom of press, privacy, or freedom of speech. Privacy is a major issue. That data is being shared. It's going to be very hard to put a genie back in the bottle once it's out. But I think privacy is a major issue. I think you've seen all of us be very aggressive on energy and commerce and others about the false data that's been fed onto Facebook, and Twitter and all of Instagram, all the different platforms of trying to impact and influence. And we don't know what should the accountability be of these platforms in terms of accurate data. So this will be one of the issues that I will be out front and center on in the next Congress.
Yeah, I agree with everything Debbie just said. They're very complicated issues. The Judiciary Committee is a very partisan committee in my experience. And so it'd be difficult for that committee to work in a bipartisan fashion. And then the other thing that's a problem, and it's the same kind of problem. People talk about the need for campaign finance reform. So, Debbie, why don't you take the lead on introducing a bill that will infringe on people's First Amendment rights? Because if we're going to really take on the Citizens United case, we have to deal with freedom of speech. And so what politician is going to go to the voters and go, we're just going to impair your freedom of speech just a little bit in the interest of improving our elections and the campaign finance laws surrounding them? No one wants to go down that road, Democrat or Republican. And so some of the same issues involving social media and the platforms are difficult issues for politicians to take on. One, because as you saw in the Senate, most of them don't understand it. Too old, it's not in their wheelhouse. And second, they're really issues that go to our liberties that we regard so dear.
I mean, there's that legendary moment from the hearing with Mark Zuckerberg, and one of the senators asked, "How do you make money?" And he says, well, "Senator, we run ads." It was a great moment. Everyone just kind of silence in the entire room as like, wow, that was really asked. And it shows that gap.
We've talked a lot about the problems in the House and the division and how Speaker Pelosi is going to hold her team together. But the Senate is a whole different beast, right? I mean, I used to joke that when I was out giving speeches that, the Senate is where all our bills go to die. And the reason why they all die over there is because of the aggressive nap schedule in the Senate. They don't really do anything over there. So.
Okay, so I'll be even tackier. John Dingle used to say that when someone left the House and went to the Senate, the IQ of both institutions increased. And John Dingle said we could eliminate the Senate. We should. So I got my John Dingle shots in for the day.
I'm surprised it took us 45 minutes. I got another question here that I think is pretty great in the Q&A. Is there a path to reform by ending some of the tools Obama and Trump and others have used to unilaterally create policy? How can Congress rein in use of executive orders, diversion of funds, the ability to ignore congressional subpoenas, to strengthen Congress's role in trade, etc.?
Well, that's obviously a complicated question as well. I would not support, and I'd be interested in Debbie's thoughts on this, but I would not support eliminating the Congressional Review Acts, which gives Congress the ability to basically pull back on any regulation that was promulgated by an outgoing administration within the last 6 legislative months they were in office. So, it goes back almost a year then. And, one thing, and again, people can disagree, but one of the reasons why our economy gained even greater momentum after President Obama left office is the Republican Congress fairly quickly pulled back some 20 or more regulations under the CRA provisions that really freed up the economy, and the deregulation, I think, helped businesses flourish. So I think the use of executive orders obviously is increased tremendously. And we probably need some kind of law that gives Congress the ability to review them to make sure that they're not overreaching, because both sides have been guilty of that.
I agree with David. I think Congress has a very important responsibility for oversight and accountability. Our forefathers should have been some women, might have even been set up a system of checks and balances with 3 very separate branches of government, and Congress has that oversight responsibility, and that's critical. And that, as David just talked about, that congressional review process is where we check what he's going to try to be doing right now. Has been doing. Even Republicans and businesses don't agree with some of the executive order, the repeal of environmental regulations, say, for instance, that this administration has done. So you're going to see action in the courts on some of these issues. That's been ruled that there has been executive branch protection on some things. But I think Congress has a very critical oversight role to play, and we'll continue to fulfill that role.
Well, Congresswoman, I'm glad you brought up the environment. I know usually on Capitol Hill, people talk about protection of the Great Lakes being sort of this big unifier for us here in Michigan. Going into this next session, are there certain sort of actions you might anticipate? And this is also, of course, for you as well, Dave, thinking about invasive species, thinking about water protection, sort of different priorities involved there?
Well, I think we're going to all have to sit down in the room. Obviously, I care deeply about NEPA and endangered species and clean water. I mean, these were bills that were the first core bills that were passed. People don't understand that the Clean Water Act was, and by the way, when the Clean Water Act was passed in the Congress, it was roundly denounced. I have found, I mean, nobody can imagine that today when you understand the importance of clean water, but I was going back through files and clippings, and people who wanted to do the Clean Water Act in those days were demonized. And it was actually introduced because everybody thinks about the Cleveland River having caught on fire, but the Rouge River was caught on fire 50 years ago. And that was the inspiration for the Clean Water Act, just to be. So I think we have to do something. Global climate's real. Nobody can see the fires in California, the hurricanes in Florida, the dramatic weather patterns we are seeing, and not know the global climate is real. The question is, how do you get everybody to the table to take some action that is going to protect jobs and the environment at the same time? So I'm someone that thinks we need to get to a carbonless society by 2050 or set that as a goal, but how do you bring everybody to the table? Yes, and clean water, by the way, I think is one of those issues. Water as a human right is an issue that we can find agreement on next year.
Well, Ben, so a bit of good news. When I got elected, one of the first things that happened was Debbie Dingle was responsible for putting back together the bipartisan bi-monthly meetings of the Michigan delegation, which had stopped. And I found those meetings, I never missed one of them. I think the entire delegation from Michigan attended them, with the exception of Justin Amash. I don't think he ever came, but he probably didn't have a place at the table anyway. And those meetings were very productive for Michigan because we worked on bipartisan issues like protecting our Great Lakes. And when President Trump zeroed out the Great Lakes Restoration Fund from $300 million to zero, the entire Michigan delegation said, we're not voting for your budget. We're not cooperating at any level unless you fully restore that funding. So the good news is, despite some pessimism from me today, as a delegation, we have worked fairly effectively, in my opinion, on protecting issues important to Michigan, most notably our Great Lakes. I do think, the EPA regulation issue is an interesting one, because I think on some level, some of the regulations that President Obama put in effect were too overreaching. I had constituents complain to me that they had a pond on their front yard, and that was considered waters of the United States, and they couldn't do anything with their farmland, and so on and so forth. And so I don't think those issues were overblown. I think the regulations were overreaching and not well crafted. And then Trump came in, and I don't think he ever read or understood any of the regulations. He just wanted to do everything that, wanted to undo everything that President Obama had done from the Paris Accords on down. So he worked on repealing all of those regulations, not because there was good public policy behind it, just because he wanted to be different. I was on a panel last week at the Ford School for University of Michigan, and we were talking about, a student asked a question, well, why don't the Republicans believe in climate change? And I was part of the climate change caucus, so I'm not one of those Republicans. I'm sitting here in Michigan today. It's 80 degrees today. I think we broke the record by 5 degrees, and it's the 7th day in November that it's been over 70 degrees, new record. So it's crazy weather here. And I left Florida because we have the 7th named hurricane of the season hitting Naples, Florida right now. So I believe there's climate change going on. The reason why Republicans don't want to talk about climate change and won't acknowledge it is the same reasons why some Republicans won't wear a mask, because our great leader doesn't believe in them. It's a little bit like North Korea, don't you think? The leader says don't wear a mask, don't believe in climate change, and you can't go there. So I hope with a different leader and a different dialogue that we can make some progress on climate. I know that that's going to be a high priority for President Biden, and he'll do it, I think, on some level with or without the Republicans.
Thanks, Dave. And then I'll do one more question from the Q&A and then hand it back over to Jim. I think it's just kind of a good way to kind of put this together. How can more moderate lawmakers on both sides work to find common ground going forward? And how do you bring along the partisan lawmakers, especially in the House, who are so far apart on so many issues?
Well, quite frankly, I just think you have to make a decision to do so. I mean, I may sound naive, but David and I became friends instantly when he came. Fred Upton is one of my best friends. John Molinar and I picked our offices. We had the Michigan corridor, and I'm already finding out if he's going to look at moving, which they don't want us to do, because I like having that Michigan connection. So you can either demonize each other, which I think is not okay. We got to stop this demonization. Joe Biden even said that on Saturday night when he said, let's stop this demonization of each other. So we got a lot of common goals. If you're in Michigan, you care about the Great Lakes, you care about the auto industry, you care about our economy, you care about PFAS. There are a lot of things that we all care about. And by the way, if you want to win, you put together a coalition. It's stronger when you've got more buy-in to it. And it's hard work. You got to roll up your sleeves and work at it. But if you roll up your sleeves and work at it, you can make progress.
Well, it's a great question, and I see, Ben, in the chat that there's a number of students that have raised that exact question. How can more moderate folks work together and accomplish things? I think it starts with the leader. So I think, you know, President Obama, in my opinion, has been the great divider. And so I think a leader can bring us together. And again, that puts some pressure. Maybe it's not definitive, but it puts some pressure on members of Congress to work together. So it starts with the leader. We haven't had that certainly in the last 4 years. And I would say to some extent, President Obama, you know, wasn't the great uniter either, and people may disagree with that. But I don't think we've had anyone that has brought us together as a president in quite some time. People often blame gerrymandering for exacerbating the partisan divide, and it probably does. So if you had a district that was much more competitive, 52-48, instead of going home and saying to the voters, I stopped Obamacare, and I stopped immigrants from coming in and killing you, and I stopped the budget from exploding, which sure hasn't happened lately, and so on and so forth. Instead of going back and saying everything you stopped and prevented, you'd have to go home and say, well, here's what I accomplished, and here's why I deserve 2 more years. So gerrymandering would help maybe eliminate that, with the caveat that we're going to have a lot more competitive races. So instead of spending $14 billion in an election cycle like we did this time, we might be spending $20 billion because there's even be more competitive races. So be careful what you ask for, because then we're supposed to spend 90% of our time raising money now, might be spending 95% of the time in a post-gerrymandering world. But I think, and I agree with Debbie, you know, we got to become, you know, stop attacking each other and all that. But I don't think just saying, hey, we're going to try and work together better is really going to yield any meaningful results. It hasn't. And people like Debbie sincerely believe what she just said, but it doesn't get us anywhere. I think one of the solutions that the Problem Solvers Caucus put forward could make a huge difference in addressing the dysfunction in at least the House. Again, the Senate is a different problem. But in the House, if a member of Congress could introduce a bill or a resolution and have 290 co-sponsors, and under the rules of the House, that bill would have to come to the floor for a vote. The committee chair, leadership, no one could stop him or her from getting that bill to the floor. It had to come up for a vote. And of course, when it came to the floor for a vote, it would pass. Then it would go die in the Senate. But we would have great bipartisan efforts, because if I had a great climate solution idea, or if Debbie had a great solution for making sure Social Security remains solvent, you could get people to co-sponsor that, and it would come up for a vote and it would pass. And the reason why they won't let that happen is leadership doesn't want to give up their power. I don't know if you saw this a few weeks ago. Wolf Blitzer was interviewing Speaker Pelosi, and asking her why she wouldn't let the new relief package on COVID come to the floor that the Problem Solvers Caucus had put together, why we shouldn't allow a vote on it. And she said, I'm going to let our committee chairpersons make those decisions. I'm not going to take the control away from them. Well, that's the whole problem with the inability to work in a bipartisan fashion, because people won't let go of their power. And if they decentralize it and let a first-term member of the House come up with a good idea and bring it to the floor for a vote, a couple things would happen. Problems would get solved. People could go back home and talk about what they accomplished instead of they running on what they stopped from happening. And the place would start working in a bipartisan fashion. And the best thing about bipartisan ideas is they tend to be better ideas because they stand the test of time. The new administration comes in and they don't strip it and destroy it all because it's a good bipartisan solution, hopefully. Or if it's not a good bipartisan solution, then a bipartisan effort to fix it can be put in place, like should have happened with Obamacare.
Thank you. I'll switch it over to Jim.
I'm on mute. Okay. Ben, thanks so much for sharing those questions. We've got about 15 minutes left, and I'm going to ask a few questions, and then Ben's going to wrap things up. But I want to pick up on this thread that you've been on with in talking about how to actually make things happen and get Congress to become more functional. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you started to suggest earlier, which is getting Congress to assert its Article 1 powers. In other words, Article 1 of the Constitution arranges, sets up Congress, delineates its power. And as both of you, I think, have mentioned, over the last number of decades, and particularly in the last, say, 10 or 15 years, Congress has let that power slip. And do you think it is possible, and how could members of Congress come together from both parties to try to reestablish Congress's Article 1 powers?
Well, Carl Levin was an example of someone who was a very strong believer in oversight and did it very effectively. So I think that I think David was right when he said earlier that oversight has become too political. And quite frankly, the man that I was married to was known for his oversight. John and Carl were close friends, and both were very effective at oversight. But some of it goes back to what David was talking about in terms of when you do investigations, they're not political when you can involve the other side. When you try to I think, yes, investigations can become political, but I think a common thread between Carl Levin and John Dingle's oversight was substance, not politics, not going for the soundbite, but being very concerned about what the issue was at hand that the oversight was being done on. I think that this is going to be a very serious issue for the new Congress, because I think the last 4 years have been very critical for the lack of oversight, or the lack of, many of the people just have, this administration's just blown off the Congress. There are a number of court cases still pending. And I think this is going to be something very serious for the new Congress and for the new administration to set a tone, and that we're going to have to look at both, are there laws that we need to pass, and court action that strengthens the oversight function of the Congress.
Yeah, Jim, it would be great to think that, well, once we get into the post-Trump era, oversight will start to become more as it was intended in Article 1, and we'll be fine, because that's not, even pre-Trump, it wasn't working right. I think that we need to have laws in place where there are swift and severe consequences for administration officials ignoring subpoenas, destroying documents, lying under oath, and they have to be adjudicated in a place where that process can't go on for years. Right now, if we ignore, the Judicial Committee issued subpoenas and they were ignored. The Jeb Henseling, when I was on financial services, issued subpoenas to the CFPB. They were ignored. So it's not just a Republican problem, right? And but there has to be consequences, and it has to happen quickly. If you look at I think there's a select committee on the modernization of Congress, or the reform of Congress, and they have 97 ideas that they have promulgated on how Congress could work better. And if you look at those 97 ideas, 85 of them are just window dressing. Like, we just need people to do the right thing and work together better. And again, lofty goals, but probably unattainable given the political environment. There are a few ideas that probably have some meat to them. One of them is on oversight committees. Maybe the questions are written and asked by a bipartisan committee staff. And so they take the political soundbite piece out of the equation. And the Jim Jordans of the world can't, showboat. And by the way, I asked one of my colleagues, he was in the Tea Party group, and I said, why'd you drop out of that group? I was never in it, but what caused you to drop out? He said, well, Dave, I found that their main motivation was their desire to monetize on our dysfunction. Right? So that's what the committee hearings are about these days, oversight and others. And I think maybe a bipartisan committee staff could come up with more meaningful, productive questions. That's one solution that, and one of the other suggestions is to create a special court so things could be addressed quickly.
The Levin Center had the honor of testifying before that Modernization of Congress committee and has suggested a number of ideas that were adopted. And so we're hopeful, and it sounds like the two of you think that there are some ideas there that could possibly make a difference. One idea that's been talked about is, and I wanted your thought about it, is having Congress enforce its own subpoenas. Congress has inherent enforcement power. Now it hasn't exercised that power in a long time, but there is talk about trying to strengthen that power, possibly use the power to fine people who are not complying with subpoenas. Throwing them in jail, maybe not so much, but possibly imposing fines on people to try to make, as you say, Dave, the consequences more immediate. Would either of you support that idea?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think we're both talking about when we say we need to look at legislation that actually puts, addresses where some of the weaknesses have developed over these years. Mm-hmm. That would be one tool.
So now we've only got a few minutes left, and I think it's really appropriate as we move toward the end of this to really talk about the problem that is most serious and most urgent before all of us, and that is obviously the pandemic. Is there a way, do you think, as this Biden administration moves forward with a new Congress, is there a way to try to depoliticize the next phase of our response to the pandemic, whether it's vaccine distribution, hopefully when that comes about, national purchasing of PPE and testing materials and services, and maybe helping hospitals, even a mask mandate? Is there a way to depoliticize this and turn the focus to the problem itself instead of our divisions? Either one of you, give your thoughts.
This is what we have to, but saying that we have to doesn't make it happen. I think that it was the leadership of this administration that made this such a political issue, from minimizing what the potential impact was to not encouraging people to wear masks when the scientific evidence began to show that would make a difference. And I have no idea how this country has politicized mask wearing in the way that we have. I think, as I said at the beginning of this, the fact of the matter is that the first action President-elect Joe Biden took was to establish a COVID task force. He's asked people to wear masks. He is leading by wearing a mask. I think he has picked some of the most eminent scientists and doctors in the country to develop a national strategy. We have to ensure that when we have found a vaccine that is going to be approved by the FDA and it's safe and effective for most Americans, we're going to have to figure out a fair and equitable way that is distributed. Who gets it first? The frontline workers, the nurses and the doctors in the hospitals, but it needs to be free so that everybody gets it. We have another challenge. I mean, the fact of the matter is 50% of the American people won't use that vaccine right now. And the scientists and the doctors tell us that's not going to be enough to give us what we need to defeat this virus. So I think it's very serious. I think it's going to start with having a leader who takes it seriously. and having people that listen to the scientists and the doctors and let them drive the national strategy as we move into this next year. And I will say to everybody watching it, just Gretchen says, let's fix the damn roads. I'm saying to you, just wear your goddamn mask.
Dave?
So, this pandemic is not an inherently political debate. It's not like we're talking about immigration or healthcare. You can have real strong differences of opinion about those issues and the solutions, right? This is about wearing a mask, and I agree with Debbie. I am concerned that the horse is out of the barn on that a significant percentage of Americans who follow Trump believe that wearing masks is an infringement of their civil liberties, and it's an unconstitutional violation of their rights. And so I guess we should stop telling people to wear safety belts too, I guess. But so, people, what we really need is a leader who tries to take control of the issue instead of making it into a re-election initiative, right? Which is what Trump did. But even more so, the American people will do just fine. There was an article, I think, in this week's Cranes about leaders who led their companies during this pandemic and the ones that did very well. And there was a common theme among the 3 leaders they profiled. I'm not sure if it was in Cranes or someplace else, but someone sent me the link and I read the article.
It was Cranes.
The common theme was they tell the truth. They tell the truth. You come out, you tell people, here's where we are. Their cases are on the rise. We're working on a vaccine. Don't inject yourself with bleach. Wear a mask. Social distance. And just keep being patient because we got to get through this and it's no time to get relaxed or comfortable. Just tell us the truth. And Trump has never done that. And anyone in the administration from Fauci on down who tried to tell the truth were in jeopardy of losing their job or being reassigned or demoted. So I think Biden yesterday already spent more time on COVID than Trump has in the last several months. That's a good start. I think the task force will work on it. I think we will get a vaccine sooner than later. Pfizer's news is incredible news, hopefully yesterday. Interesting that it came out a few days after the election. I wonder when they had that. I don't want to be a conspiracy theory person, but wonder if they knew that before the election, but I suspect not. But the reality is we'll start to make progress. But if we have a leader that stands before the American people and tells us the truth, that'll go a long ways to making it less political.
Well, Dave, I think you're getting the last word among our panelists. I want to thank you both. I'm going to turn it over to Ben to give some final remarks. And this has been really, really wonderful.
I apologize for my use. I offended somebody. I'm sorry. I feel that strongly about it. I was copying our governor.
Thank you both for such a great panel this afternoon. Really appreciate it. I mean, we covered a lot of ground. There was a lot of topics. There was a lot of really great discussion. Really thankful for such a quality, wonderful experience that we just had here. Well, I want to thank everyone else also for joining us today with this panel. As a reminder, a recording of today's panel will be posted on the events section of the Levin Center website, which is available at law.wayne.edu/Levin-Center. Everyone who attended today will receive a very brief 3-question survey asking you to evaluate today's panel to help us continue to improve how we do our work here at the Levin Center. For information on future discussions and to stay up to date with all the great things happening at the Levin Center, please follow us on Twitter and like our page on Facebook. Thank you all again and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Ben. Take care, Debbie.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. You take care. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Good to be
Thanks,
with you.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, everybody.